We are continuing our series in the book of 2 Kings. We're going to go to chapter 18. Last week, John introduced us to a character named Hezekiah, and we're really going to spend this morning doing a study of Hezekiah. We're beginning to get to the end of Kings. We're wrapping this up. Last week, we saw the end of the kingdom of Israel. Remember, at this time, the kingdom that we know as Israel was divided into two sections. There was the northern kingdom, which is Israel, and that was the lands of Israel. And also, we're going to read in here called Samaria. So that was the land that was just conquered last week in chapter 17 by the Assyrians. They came in and came from the north and conquered all the way down. So now we have this scene where the southern kingdom called Judah, led by King Hezekiah, is kind of in this spot. And we're going to read more about that in a little bit. But we're going to dive into who Hezekiah is. And he's a really interesting character. Really a phenomenal character in the study because he embodies so much about, I think, what we're going through in this culture today. Because you remember, we've talked about this, the history of Israel and Judah is not a great history of faithfulness to God in the last 400 years. The northern kingdom has zero good kings. They are all bad kings. They are all wicked. They all pursue idolatry. They all leave the things of God behind. The southern kingdom isn't a lot better, but they do have a couple of really good kings. This is after the fall. This is after Solomon. And one of the good kings we're going to see is Hezekiah, a man who really pursued the things of God. But as we dive into this, I want to ask you guys kind of a question. What's the most important thing? Oh man, it's going to be one of those series, one of those sermons. Yes. What's the most important thing? What do we do in life that is the most valuable? What is the most thing, if you could contribute anything? And maybe this is just a thought that I have as a parent who has multiple kids. What's the one thing I want my kids to know? What's the one thing that's most important to my kids more than anything else? And it's, if you say one word, it's salvation. I want them to know Jesus. But I don't want to just leave it at that word, because sometimes we hear salvation and we think, okay, they prayed. Oh, okay, we're good. No. I want my kids to I want them to love Jesus. I want them to know Him deeply. I want them to know the things about God. I want them to have their lives completely transformed by the truths of God and the things found in the Bible, that their lives are vibrant. And that's kind of how I get to, what's the most important thing? Well, that is. That's my prayer for people that I meet. I want you to be in love with Jesus. I want you to know the things. I want you to have Him inside of you, transforming every aspect of our decisions and our lives and the ways of the things that we take. That's the most important thing, right? So as we look at this, sometimes it's a tendency as we get to the end of Kings, as we get to the end of the historical Old Testament, it's like, well, He's just saying, punishing these people because they've been naughty. It's just this gigantic spanking to Israel because they can't get it right, so therefore I'm going to haul them off into Israel and maybe they'll learn their lesson. But that's a wrong perspective to take. God will do, if it's this important, if it's this important to us that salvation is it not true that God will do what is necessary to save our most important thing? To save our hearts, to invest in a future, to invest in generations. God is not a God He's a God of the moment, but He's a God that sees for eternity. He's a God that will do what is necessary to capture the hearts of those whom He calls His own, which is us. It's a hard truth sometimes because we don't necessarily want to think about the implications of that. Will God do what is necessary in my life to get my attention for the things that are needed? I think so. I think He will. I think He will do things that are necessary to get our attention, to wake us up, to get our hearts in check so that we will follow Him with everything, unabandoned, unshackled, pursuing Christ wholly and Him alone. Not being distracted by the other things of the world. Because this is, I think, what's going on right now in the time of Hezekiah, in the time of Judah. Assyria, the superpower, the villain of the story, is coming down, has conquered the northern kingdom. They're knocking on the doorstep of the kingdom of Judah. Hezekiah is king. He's a good king. He's only been king for probably about 3 years before Assyria conquers. He's a young king. He's like 32 years old. He's kind of fresh in all this area of stuff. And Assyria's coming down, and they are full of idolatry, full of wickedness. Not that Israel was doing a whole lot better without them. But here they are, and there's got to be some pressure. I mean, if you think about it, I think this fits in the world today. As Christians, we watch the news, we live in our lives, and all of a sudden we feel this, maybe it's an unseen or even an unfelt pressure at times because we've lived in it for so long that the world is doing this, and here we are just trying to survive. Do you guys ever get that feeling watching the news or paying attention to current events? Sometimes I feel that pressure just to, if I can just make it. If I can just get to the end of this, then I'll be okay. I'll just complain a little bit, and if I could just get to the end of this, then it'll be okay. But this is what I think the lesson of Hezekiah is in the midst of all of this. He takes over a kingdom that is going south very quickly. And yet he lives his life so intentionally for God that it affects so many other things in the kingdom. And there's even glimmers of hope. Unfortunately, Hezekiah dies, but at the end of this, he's going to pass away. And his son, Manasseh, takes over, and he picks up right where all of his ancestors picked up and continues down the journey. But Hezekiah lives his life so intentionally on purpose for God. Everything he does, things start to change. Remember last week they had this idea, they were worshiping the bronze serpent that Moses put up in Exodus, and he takes it down, he chops it up. A symbol of a previous faithfulness of God, but he sees that his people are pursuing it instead of following God. He's that attuned to what they're doing. He's that attuned to the idolatry. It's not that he sees his people worshiping things that are about God and not God himself. He's intentionally investing in his people, intentionally investing his life. He's not living life in a reaction to the world, to the pressures of Assyria. He's not living that way, but he's living his life on purpose with what God is doing. So we're going to see some pretty incredible things. But one of the stories that I think fits kind of well with this is I read a biography just a couple weeks ago on Martin Luther. And I don't know if you guys know much about Luther, but he was, before he was the Luther that we know of him, the great church reformer, he was a monk. And he was wrestling with the truths of God. And one day he was walking from one place to another and got caught in the midst of apparently an incredible thunderstorm. And there was lightning and thunder, and he was caught out kind of in the open, kind of huddled underneath the shelter of a rock. And he describes it in a diary later how he was terrified for his life. The situation that brings everything kind of to a reality. And he cries out, I'll do this. I'll become what you need me to do, God. I'll become a monk. I will follow you to what I can do. Now, is it that magical thunderstorm that did it? No. But it was that caused him to start thinking about life. And the big questions of life of what is most important? What is the thing that we value most? How do I not just live life with this in the back of my mind, trying to affect the things that I am, but how does it encompass who I am? How do I live this way intentionally? How do I do things on purpose? How do I live a life that honors God, honors Christ in everything I do, not just the things that I think about? This is Hezekiah. So let's pick up chapter 18, so start in verse 1. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, not Ahab, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old and he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. So we're beginning the 29-year reign of Hezekiah. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. Now here's something really interesting. I think this is kind of a phenomenal thing right away. Okay, we're going to see two people in Hezekiah's life that have some influence upon him, some major influence. One we know absolutely nothing about, and her name is Abi. When you read through the book of Kings, they don't talk about the mothers unless they have a role. Usually he's the son of this person, the son of this person. I mean, there's 8, 9, 10 kings in a couple chapters because they're all just wicked kings. They continue to do this cycle. And here we have Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, but also the son of Abi. Now, I may be reading into things a little bit too much because they really don't know anything else about this person. But I think it's significant that the mother is listed. And Hezekiah is drastically different than everything else, every other king that we've ever mentioned. Here we have the influence of someone, investing in someone. This is what I think. I was talking to John about this, and this is kind of what we think, man, think of the implications of this. How is it different? Well, can we assume that this is one person, a mother, possibly who's invested time and life and love into her son, that her son isn't going to do the wicked things of all of the other ancestors in the past 400 years? Yeah, I'm reading into things. But maybe. I think there's individuals that can invest and change things more than we realize. And that's really kind of the first point I want to make, because we're also going to read about a prophet named Isaiah. Same Isaiah who wrote a good chunk of the Old Testament is a prophet in the house of Hezekiah. And both Isaiah and, I will say, Abby have this strong impact, an intentional impact on Hezekiah. As he lives his life, we're going to see examples of him running to Isaiah for counsel. Running to Isaiah for a word of what does God say about this? Running to Isaiah for how can I best follow God? He's living his life not with this blind stepping forward saying, I'm going to do this and God's going to follow me. But here we have Hezekiah in the midst of a pressure situation. Remember, Assyria is breathing down his neck. They want to conquer the southern kingdom. And Hezekiah, in the face of this immense army, doesn't cave to what they want. He says, what does God want? What is God doing? And he has these enormous people in his life, like Isaiah, saying, no, God is bigger than Assyria. No, God is bigger than this. No, don't listen. Don't cave to the pressures. Don't cave to what the world tells you. Don't, no. This is what Isaiah says, and he continues to call and encourage Hezekiah to come. Picking up again in verse 3, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all that David his father had done. David, the righteous king, the pinnacle of Israel. He removed the high places and broke down the pillars and cut down the Asherah, and he broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the people of Israel had made offerings to it, and it was called the Nehushutan. And he trusted the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but he kept the commandments that the Lord had commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him wherever he went out. He prospered. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and would not serve him. He struck down the Philistines as far as Gaza and his territory, watchtower to fortified city. So not only did he rebel against the powers of Assyria, not only did he push back against the great power that was breathing, he went south and he reconquered the land that was supposed to be his. Hezekiah is not settling for survival. He's not settling for just, I'm going to make it through this one day and I hope that it'll be okay and I'm going to do my best. He's settling for intentionality, intentionally living for what God is doing. And it's because he had the investment of certain people. I think this is a big part of Hezekiah's life. It's not that Hezekiah was so strong, because I feel like that's kind of the way that we're taught growing up in the American way, is that you are to be who you are, to be who you're supposed to be, to fake it until you make it, and if you absolutely have to, then you ask for help. I feel like that's what's subconsciously taught us as we're growing up, that this is what you have to be. You have to make your own way. And don't get me wrong, there's some truth to that. You are supposed to work hard and make your own way, but there's a point when I need help. I can't do this on my own. Christianity was never designed to be one person against the world among other Christians, but we are to be a group of people called the church that intentionally gathers, intentionally invests, intentionally disciples, and intentionally teaches each other so that we realize we are all in this together. We all have things that we need. We all have things that we desperately want. We all have things that are a part of each other. And we have this miraculous gift that Jesus left us with called the church. And here we are. And it's messy at times, but at all times, when it's glorifying to Christ, it is beautiful. Absolutely. And here we have Hezekiah, who I think intentionally is humble. Isaiah, what do you think? My mom taught me this. Where should I go? What's God doing? I don't want to make this assumption. I don't want to step somewhere I don't know where I'm going. I don't want to just take a guess. What's God doing in the midst of this? It reminds me of the story of Daniel a lot, where Daniel's in the midst of being captured and enslaved by Babylon, but he doesn't just survive, he thrives. And here I have Hezekiah doing the same thing. In the midst of turmoil, of political pressure, of war on his doorstep, he is thriving because he has placed everything who he is in God. If you flip with this, so a lot of times we spent a lot of time talking about Elijah and Elisha in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. And they were prominent prophets in the northern kingdom. But we really didn't start talking about all the other prophets that came about in the southern and the northern kingdom as well. There's a lot of other ones. If you open your Bibles and you look at the table of contents, you're going to see there's a whole section of, there's 4 major prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and there's 12 minor prophets. There's 16 prophets who are affecting Israel and Judah during this time of the king. 16 books of the Bible. They make up a large chunk of our Old Testament. And those are people that are proclaiming the same truths that Elijah and Elisha did. But here we have a very strong crossover of Isaiah, because Isaiah was very much located in the palace with Hezekiah. So if you were to flip, if you want to flip, otherwise you can just follow along. Isaiah chapter 37, 36 through 39 record the same story in Isaiah, but chapter 37 records something really unique that I want to share with you guys, because I think it brings a little piece of the heart of Hezekiah. Because in Isaiah 37, and I think this is just a demonstration of the relationship that Isaiah had with Hezekiah, he records a prayer of Hezekiah. And it says in Isaiah 37, starting in verse 26, this is Hezekiah's prayer. Haven't you not heard that I determined it long ago, that I planned from the days of old, which I now bring to pass, that you should make fortified cities crash into heaps of ruins? Whether their inhabitants, shorn of strength, are dismayed and confounded, have been like plants of the field, are like tender grass, like grass on the housetops, blighted from its growth. So he's talking about the situation. I feel trapped. I feel like the world is coming down around me. I feel like, God, you've done this, and I know I'm trusting in you. And here he is talking, God's response to him. I know you're sitting down, and I know you're going out, and you're coming in, and I even know you're raging against me. That's an honest prayer. And he shares this with Isaiah. Because you have raged against me and your complacency has come to my ears, I will put my hook in your nose, which sounds kind of weird, right? But think about that. Think about the picture of the bull and leading the bull by the nose. God's like, I'm going to take you, I'm going to lead you where you need to go. In the midst of your rage, in the midst of your complaining, in the midst of your survival, in the midst of you not knowing where to go, you can just imagine this picture of God grabbing you by the nose. Come this way. Come here. You know, when we grab someone's face, listen to me. That's what I'm thinking, right? And I will put a bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back the way by which you came. You may start to wander. You may start to go this way and that way. Here I am. Here I am. I think that's pretty cool. In the midst of all of this, things that's going on, God is, I'm right here. Don't be distracted. Don't turn left. Don't turn right. Look at me. Follow me. Let me lead you in the ways. Let me lead you in the way of everlasting. Let me tell you my wisdom. Let me share with you. And I can just imagine Isaiah in the midst of this thing, helping him realize this, helping him understand this, helping him to invest in this. Look at God. Don't be distracted. Don't be distracted. So, don't underestimate the power of a person's influence on your life. And that includes yourself. Don't underestimate the power of your investment in another person's life as well. If you want to flip the page, we're going to go to chapter 19 in 2 Kings. So we've kind of got the situation of what's going on. And here we have Isaiah continually to reassure him. But really what we're going to see now is him taking it to another level. We have Isaiah's investment. We have Abby's investment. We have Hezekiah's investment. The people of Israel or Judah are starting to turn. And now we get to 2 Kings 19. And it says, as soon as Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth, went into the house of the Lord, and sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and the senior priest, and they covered with sackcloth. Because this is, Assyria is about to invade. They've decided, we're sick of waiting. We're sick of trying to bargain. We're coming in. And Hezekiah is a wreck. He is torn. His people, his kingdom, God's people are just about to be invaded. And they say to Hezekiah, this is the day of distress, of rebuke and disgrace, that they have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to bring them forth. It may be that the Lord your God heard all the words of the Rabshakeh, which is the people, which is this group of people from Assyria who have come to try to bargain for a peace. But he says, no, I'm not having peace. I'm not having this thing where you're bringing your idols into my country. No, we are standing with God. And whom his master, the king, has sent to mock the living God. And they will rebuke the words the Lord your God has heard. Therefore lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. And then when the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, say to your master. So here's Isaiah speaking the Lord's response. Do not be afraid because of the words that you have heard, which the servants of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own place. So here it is going on. Hezekiah is being faithful. He's being intentional. He's loving God. He's trying to serve the best he can. And Assyria's like, no, we're coming in. We've had enough of this. We've tried to bring in our idols, because that's what would happen is these conquering countries would come in and they would take over and they would bring in a whole cartload of their idols. They'd put them all over the place, and it would be this sign to the people they conquered saying, see, our God is not only better and bigger, he's God you're going to worship now. And they would force it upon them. It's this total mocking to absolute conquering of this type of nature. It's not just a physical conquering, they're trying to be a spiritual conqueror. And obviously, Israel has already been spiritually conquered. They already worshipped idols. They were already gone. But now Assyria's brought it in, and they're bringing in these idols as well. And Hezekiah is like, no, get those out. We want none of that. You will not mock my God. You will not mock our God. And Assyria throws her hands up and says, well, we tried. Now we're just going to take it by force anyways. But God is the ruler of all. Here's the faithfulness of Hezekiah. And the faithfulness of Hezekiah is also aligned here with the faithfulness of God. It's an incredible two-way thing. Not only is Hezekiah continually faithful, but God is always faithful. Always faithful. God's like, don't worry, I'm going to tell him there's going to be a rumor. He's going to fly back to Assyria. He's going to think this rumor's true. He's going to get up there and he's going to die by his own people. Because God is not just the ruler of Israel. He's not just the ruler of this area. He's not just the ruler of this. He's the ruler of everything. There is power in who God is and who God rules and how he rules. It is incredible. So I started thinking about this, and I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. How does this relate to us today? How does this just fit with me? Because it's like, yeah, great, God is in control. I kind of know that. But how do I let that live out my life now? And I started thinking about the world is this place of battle, of war, of conquering, and going back and forth. And I'm wondering, is there any idols that have been left in my life by the world? By the things that I have grown up in? Because I've grown up in a world that has not been totally isolated from culture. We live in a world that has things that are telling us what to do and telling us how to think and telling us how to feel and even telling us what to believe, telling us what is right. And we get this idea we have to not accept everything at face value, but we have to be intentionally living and saying, what does the Bible say about this? What does God say about this? How am I to react to the things of the world and what they're saying? And I'm just starting to think, are they trying to leave their own idols in lives? Are they trying to drop their own stakes of ground? Are they trying to conquer their own little areas where they can come back to it again and say, see? You see? And they try to weaken my defenses, to sneak in the back door of my own spiritual life and to drop these hints saying, but isn't God this way? Why do you think God is this? And they tell you lies about, isn't God always loving? Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do that? And then they start to erode us at our foundations. Intentionality in the way that we choose to follow God, but intentionality also in the way that we choose to examine ourselves. Because I know when I am left to my own devices and my own self, and something goes wrong in my life, I am the last person to blame, right? I'm the last person whose fault it is. But it's definitely never God's fault. And that's the truth. How do I continually rely on him who is more faithful than I deserve? Who is more faithful than I could ever be? Who is more faithful and who will never be wrong? Who will never be unfaithful? God, eternal and everlasting. Always for us, never against us, but yet will do what is necessary for our salvation in our hearts. So, okay, we're moving kind of quick. I've got a little bit of time left. So why don't you go ahead and flip again. We're going to continue on. So what we got last going on is Assyria's coming in, right? And they're still coming in. The one king goes off. He gets killed in his own country, but there's another king, and he's like, I'm still going to keep going. We're still going to keep pushing in. We're still going to conquer Israel. Hezekiah, in the face of all this, it seems like the world's coming to an end. It seems like he's going to be carried off into exile and prison. We get this chapter in 19, starting in verse 14. When Hezekiah received the letter, he went up to the house of the Lord, and Hezekiah prayed, O Lord, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are God. You alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made the heavens and the earth. Incline your ear, listen to me. Open your eyes and see that the words of the Sennacherib, which is the king of Assyria, he has mocked the living God. But truly, O God, the kings of Assyria have laid waste the nations and have cast their gods into the fire, for they were not gods, but the work of men, hand and wood and stone, they were destroyed. So now, O Lord, our God, save us from his hand, for all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you are God alone. That's a powerful prayer. Hezekiah is not in the seat of the oppressor. He's not in the seat of the dominant power. Israel or Judah is not the place where it's going to have this dynamic underdog comeback. But their power is in something far greater than any army or power or politician. But you are God alone. So what happens? This is just the neat story. So what happens? If you jump to chapter 20, we're going to have to skip a little bit, but if you pick up in 35, so there's a gigantic army encamped at the gate of Judah. They're about to march in. What's going to happen? But Hezekiah continues to intentionally trust, intentionally invest his time, his faith, his effort, his words, everything, continually back into God. And we get to verse 35, and it says, And that night an angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of Assyria. 185,000 enemy troops were struck down. That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. God continues to show that he is God, that his way is going to prosper, that it is not Assyria who's going to do this. It is not Assyria who's going to come in and conquer Judah. We do know later that Babylon comes in because we know Hezekiah dies and they still can't get it right. And God is still going to do what is necessary to get their hearts. But in the midst of right now, in the midst of faithfulness, in the midst of intentionality, God continues to prove, I will do what I will do because I am God and no one else is. Can you imagine them trying to hold up their little wooden idols as an angel's slot just goes through them all? Just an incredible picture. Incredible picture. Okay. If you were to continue reading in chapter 20, there's really a neat story, and this is something I would encourage you all to do, is to read through the life of Hezekiah in more detail. And if you want to read also Isaiah 36 through 39, you'll hear Isaiah's retelling of Hezekiah's rule and life. But what happens next is Hezekiah gets very, very sick, that he's going to die, that things are going to happen, and he goes to the Lord and he says, Lord, will you please, I have followed your ways, I have extended you, I have tried to expand your kingdom, I have lived intentionally on purpose. Oh Lord, will you please lengthen my life? Okay, Hezekiah is not old. He's not old by any means. And God hears his prayer and he grants him 15 more years of reigning. 15 more years. Now, is this a formula for how we are to pray? Is this a formula for how we expect healing? No, this is not the point of the story. The point of this story is the investment. It is the life. It is the investment of the faithfulness of Hezekiah, but also the continued faithfulness of God to say, yes, let my people be ruled faithfully. Let my people be ruled well. Let my name be continually glorified. Let my glory be continually gone out. Because if you look at the life of Hezekiah, one thing that he doesn't ever do is he doesn't ever falter. Yes, he has his moments where he's undone, where he's exhausted, where he is tired, where he doesn't know what to do is next. That is okay. That is a good example of the Christian life of someone when we do get that way, and it will happen, we run back to what is solid. We run back to who God is. We don't try harder. We don't do more on our own strength. But Hezekiah continues to go to Isaiah, what does the Lord say? Or to God, what are you going to do, God? I don't know. I want to follow you. He continues to go back to this again and again and again. And this is really my last point about the life of Hezekiah, is applying this to ourselves in this life, and we cannot remain neutral. We can't be neutral. If you ever, I don't know, they say it's the millennial's curse, that no one knows how to drive a stick shift. But everyone gets the concept of a car in neutral, right? If we're going somewhere and we pop that clutch and we shift out of gear and we start coasting, we feel, okay, I got to a point in my Christian life, I'm moving forward, I'm just going to take a break and let me rest for a bit. And we sit back and it feels great right away. We're doing 60, or 59, I'm okay. And all of a sudden we look down and it's 44. And then it's 31. Okay, we're still good, we're still moving forward. And then it's 7. No, we're still, and then by then we're not even looking down anymore, right? We're not taking a check of our own life. We're not looking at our spiritual life, because I had going this way, I was going forward, I was moving this way, it was going great, things are this way, and all of a sudden we realize that I'm not moving. Or maybe it's even the point where all of a sudden, am I going backwards? Am I rolling backwards? And all of a sudden we start to think, and I mean, when I learned to drive a stick shift, I stalled on a hill. Like the first hour of learning to drive a stick shift, I could not get that thing going up a hill. I killed it so many times, and I finally, I did it. I looked at my dad and I said, you have to take over. You've got to do it, because I can't do it anymore. I don't know how to go. I can't get the timing right. I can't do it. But I was going fine. I had driven 10 miles that way, and all of a sudden, I don't want that to be my spiritual life. I don't want to be so comfortable with how I was going, how I have all of a sudden, like, let me just take a break for a minute in the world that's constantly oppressing us. Hezekiah never popped the clutch. He never coasted. He was not neutral. Hezekiah wasn't just surviving in the midst of a rebellion. He was actively rebelling against Assyria. Actively saying, no, this is not what God wants. This is not what God is doing. This is not how I want to live my life. I'm not doing it to be obstinate. I'm doing it because this is what God tells me to do. We cannot be neutral. We have not been saved to just sit back and relax. We have been saved to fight a spiritual battle in our own lives, in the lives of people around us, and for those that are desperately in need, because there are people around us, and we all know somebody who doesn't know Jesus. They don't. And if we think about the pressures of the world, and we think about how much we feel these type of things pressing down upon us in our consciousness and our decisions and our life and our morals and our truths, there are people in the world who don't have the hope that we have, and they're still trying to survive this. But we are called to thrive, to be intentional with the way that we live for Christ, and to be intentionally investing in other people. Isaiah radically invests in Hezekiah. Hezekiah radically goes to Isaiah. They are both encouraging and challenging and pushing each other to say, what is God doing? What is God saying? How do we hold the standard of what God wants? And Hezekiah was blessed because of that. He was continually reassured. He was continually reestablished in the midst of a world that is literally falling apart around him. And here we have King Hezekiah thriving. Absolutely thriving. Intentionally living. If anything, you could say this sermon is a plea for radical discipleship. For you to be radically invested in people around us, because in some ways we're living in a spiritual wartime, where we must be constantly aware of what the enemy is at work, or where the enemy is moving, or what they're telling, what they're doing, not in just my own life, but in the lives of those whom I love and I'm working with. This is a plea to follow the faithfulness of Hezekiah, how he continually throws himself on the mercy of God, a radical and severe mercy that God continually saves. He is continually faithful. We must be continually intentional. We cannot remain neutral. We must be moving forward in our spiritual life. We must be working hard to continue to strive after what God wants, both in this world, in each other, and in our own hearts. There's some level that we must be constantly at move. So, Miles? Coming from Psalm 46. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. He writes this in Jerusalem. He's being oppressed. He's being pushed on by things around him, the things of the world. But there's a river in here who makes the city of glad the city of God. The holy habitation. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when the morning dawns and the nations rage. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. Which is a phenomenal verse in the midst of what is going on. But what makes this more unique is that there is no physical river in Jerusalem. This is the spiritual river of the Spirit of God, investing in his people who invest and trust in him. Many of you will be familiar with 46 because just a few verses later it will say, "But be still and know that I am God." It reminds me of Hezekiah. It's an encouragement, but also a challenge to me in the midst of things of life when it gets chaotic and turmoil, that God is ever constant, is ever faithful, and cannot fail. And he is our God. Thanks, guys. Have a great Sunday afternoon. Let me know if you have any questions.